feedback, and then if I want to cut anything out of it or anything like that. But
Sure.
yeah, so well, I guess I'll start off by saying, like, the number one question I've had from a few people is kind of like, oh, so what are you trying to do? And the accurate answer is I'm not 100% sure. It's just this whole topic is something that in the last few weeks, God's just put on both mine and my wife's heart, like super, super strongly, kind of independently, and then talking together. And so I'm kind of diving into it. It's something that I've never really strongly had to deal with in youth ministry. We've pretty much, for the most part, have had youth ministries that are primarily church kids, and most of them, probably 80% or so, have come from the kids ministry. And so anytime we even did get into it's more like mild depression. It's more of like a seasonal thing. There's never really been like a risk of suicide or any of that kind of stuff. And so we kind of feel like this is something God's thrown us into. And I didn't know exactly where to start. I was kind of just like, I've got a YouTube channel, I got some other stuff. I'm putting content out. I'm reaching youth, reaching my youth, reaching other youth and whatnot, just out there. And I was like, well, let me just start having a conversation with some other youth pastors and whatnot and see how this goes. So that's kind of where I am. I don't have like any like master plan or any kind of whatever. I'm just like, I want to start making some connections and start a conversation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, there we go. All right. Yeah, I've had totally an opposite kind of an experience in youth ministry. In my first youth ministry, I'd say within about the first 6 months, I had 2 different families where the dad died. I had a girl get pregnant, and she was on our student leadership and like worship team, and so she had to step down. And we counseled her and walked her through that, and she's now like an awesome, still active Christian woman married to a godly man now, and so that, cool stuff has come out of a lot of those. But I had my very first night on the job at that church, I had to do a mandatory report because my mom was on a binge and on a bender and didn't come pick up her kids, and then we couldn't find her because she was out drinking somewhere. And so so a lot of that kind of stuff. And I struggled with depression as a teenager and a young adult, and God has largely delivered me from that, but it's still something that I can relate to. And I guess partially because of that, I keep getting put into situations where, I talk to people who, and students in particular, who have really struggled with that. But I had one of the kids from I just changed churches about 6 months ago, and a kid from my previous church committed suicide in January.
Wow.
And so it's hit close to home recently. And then we had a bunch of stuff going on here locally. Several students have died at different high schools due to various reasons. And then just recently, now it's almost 2 weeks, a student committed suicide. And I think there was another one last weekend locally. And that hit a bunch of our students hard. And we had done this series that on this idea before the 13 Reasons show came out. So I was already doing this. I was like, okay, we're going to hit this. Like, we have students that are depressed. We have students that are really struggling with, the idea of friends dying or family being sick and all this. So we need to address this stuff. We need to talk about suicide. And in doing that, we're going to open a can of worms that, my leaders need to be prepared for. So we did a suicide prevention training and mandatory reporting. And then we did this series, and sure enough, I've had a couple different families, not just students, but families, and saying, hey, this series that you did, getting my kid to open up about this saved his life. So yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah. So I'm like I said, I'm trying to just become more knowledgeable about it and kind of see with it. We did have.
Yeah.
I've been here a little over a year and a half. I moved out actually from California. I'm in Virginia now. And we had a kid I think it was January's ago, kill himself. And he's a kid who wasn't he was around the youth ministry, if that makes sense. He wasn't so much a part of it. We have a school here. He came to the school for a few months, and so I guess that's kind of, it started back then. So it was a little while back, and that kind of rocked some of the group, and some of the other group wasn't as much connected. And I don't know, just kind of watching and just kind of paying attention and have a few conversations I had, it kind of made me realize, like, just because our youth group isn't really prone and isn't really at risk for like suicide or even self-harm, just that concept of like, that doesn't mean they're not hurting, and that doesn't mean, like, everyone who gets to that point, it started somewhere, right? Like you don't just wake up, or you're not just born as a person who necessarily, like, that there's stuff that happened, and along the way it progressed, and it just kind of opened my eyes a little bit too, not only to the students in our community who are struggling and the ministry potential to reach out to them, but also kind of that concept of like, well, what about my students I have that have the quote unquote like great life, but there's that underneath struggling that like we just don't know about, and we don't hear about, and most of them will probably never get to the point of self-harm or suicide or any of that kind of stuff, but it is something that they're battling with, and because like we're not aware of it, so I was just kind of open my eyes to a lot of different things, and so that's just kind of an area we're kind of moving into a little bit.
Yeah, I think the thing that shocks me, I mean, like reading all the statistics and stuff, there's not a whole lot of indicators as far as like background or like life or lifestyle or anything that necessarily increase it, except the two major factors are teens and elderly with suicide risk. But I mean, like, I've had some conversations with the kid who looks depressed and is like kind of goth-ish and totally comes off as somebody who, like, all right, I'm gonna probably keep my eye on you, and worry that you may be, but then I mean, I had a student who's top of his class, headed for great things, academic scholarship, been a Christian his whole life, parents are strong Christians, super involved, whole family's involved in the church, everything else, and we had him committed to a facility on suicide watch. And so I mean, it was like, there's no like indicator. It's like, the most well-adjusted kid can totally struggle with it, and various things play in there. Some of it's different forms of mental illness or clinical depression can feed into that, but and so I mean, it can be something totally out of their control, but like you said, circumstances right now, like the 13 Reasons show talks about all the bullying and everything, and just feeling like she couldn't get control of her environment and her reputation and everything, so she lashes out in this way and makes a horrible choice, and so some kids get there. But a lot of them too, the high performing kids, if they feel like they're going to fail at something, or if they feel like they can't keep it up, they can get there really quickly too. Or the kids that, like, oh, I'm this perfect Christian kid, and oops, I slept with my girlfriend, and now I got her pregnant. Now I feel like I'm a horrible person. I'm totally a fake. I'm not what everyone thought. And if I go out now, I can avoid tarnishing my reputation and embarrassing my family. And as idiotic as that thought process is, they go there and they think this is a better way to manage this crisis than to have to actually walk through my consequences. And I've talked with a bunch of students that have gotten to that place where, I mean, they haven't done it, but where they feel that way. And if you look at it, I mean, it's not just Western culture, Japan and some of the, very advanced Oriental cultures and Asian culture, Eastern Asian cultures tend to have a lot of suicide coupled with a lot of that really high expectation of performance. And so, I like just always opening up that conversation is so important.
And I read, it's interesting you mentioned not just West, it's amongst teens is kind of I don't know if I want to use the word epidemic, but it's really becoming an issue in Russia with a lot of teens having that issue. So I'm curious your opinion, having a little bit more experience with this than me. Do you feel that like the access because I don't know if it's is it getting worse? Is it just we're seeing it more, or do you think like the access to it in shows, in teen books, so many of the books, like you go to the bookstore and you look in the teen section, they're all supernatural romances, right? Of like, you know, all that kind of stuff. The media pushing it. It's something like, you know, when I was in high school, I mean, we may have heard about like someone talk about suicide or just that topic maybe a dozen times a school year at most, and now you can have it exposed that many times in a week. Do you think that is part of driving it, where people weren't that romanticizing of it, like they're worrying about 13 Reasons, where it's building that as an option in their mind, where maybe it wasn't so much in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at, like, for all the bashing that the show has got, one thing that 13 Reasons has really showed accurately, I think, is the isolationism that students get into, the mindset of like, nobody else can understand what I'm going through. They don't even trust their peers to fully get it, even though they're right in the midst of the same deal, you know. And so they're not trusting that their friends and peers will really get it. Oh, you don't know what I'm going through. You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. You don't know how this works. And it's multiplied looking at adults, and shows like that, books like that, Twilight, this whole thing about this secret life that she's got going on that she can't tell anyone about, and the secret boyfriend, everything else. And it's so romantic and it's so passionate and it's so, you know, like, and it makes it seem like this really glamorous, awesome thing. But if you look at it, like, I'm a dad, I've got 2 daughters, and I look at that and I think, like, if my kid falls for some idiot, you know, like this kind of nonsense where it's like he's doing all these things, you know, it's all shady. There's all this big stuff going on, and it's super dangerous. And like, why are you better equipped to handle this than an adult who's got more experience in life, than somebody who actually cares about you and isn't just concerned with like, oh my gosh, like I look into your eyes and I feel like I'm drowning in pools of love. Like, that's a stupid basis for a relationship. that there's nothing there other than infatuation and lust, and that's not something to base life change on. But the hyper romanticized versions of reality in all of these media forms, I think for sure twist people's heads around and get them focused on the wrong things, and in seeking somebody who's going to make it seem really glamorous and awesome, instead of having to face the reality that, like, hey, this was a really unhealthy behavior, or this is a really unhealthy relationship, or yeah, what happened was super not okay. But the appropriate response, I don't know, have you watched the 13 Reasons show?
Yeah, we finished a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, so like when she, you know, like gets back at the stalker, like, hey, let's get him, you know, and they like go and, you know, she makes the plan to hang out with the one girl and shine the light in the camera and everything. Like they decide to do all this under the radar without their parents being involved, instead of like, dude, even if it was like the weird guy from down the street, like, how bad of an idea is that to take somebody who's hiding in your bushes and, you know, instigate something with them, like with two teen girls. Like, if that was a guy who could have broken in and hurt them or something, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's what they make horror movies out of. It's just crazy that would be the response. But the media that they consume encourages that. Even the cartoons that my kids watch it as 6-year-olds, the stuff that they watch, it has a lot of, you know, it seems innocent, but there's this kind of running theme of kind of hiding what's really going on from all the adults around.
Makes me think of Phineas and Ferb.
Yeah, this secret life that's going on that nobody else is going to get. And so they create their own reality around all of that. And that's kind of the expectation, is that you have this secret life about that. So, I mean, even like, look at Instagram with the new like Finsta stuff, you know, like that, everyone's got a fake profile, and it's all just a way to present that other side of what they want out of social media. That, like, you know, hey, you want to post your, you know, sexy photos, you put them on your Finsta. You want to rant about somebody being a jerk, you want to bully somebody, you do it on, you know, on your Finsta account, like, and then mom's following the real one. and a couple of friends from school are following the other one that you use for just trash. And but it's an expectation. It's weird now, and it came out of nowhere. But like, it's weird if you don't have one. It's not just a thing of like, oh well, a few people have it. Like, this is the expectation is you have this fake life that's separate and hidden from the outside world, and especially from adults. I think that's a really dangerous cultural phenomenon.
That's like a really good point, and I keep looking away because I'm writing notes. I'm not trying to be rude.
You're good.
That's really interesting. This whole idea of the teens operating in secrecy, not trusting, and I'm kind of like pulling out to like a micro or macro level here. Like I'm thinking like as you're talking, it's right. I could think of tons of shows that my kids watch. Secret Life of Pets, Phineas and Ferb, all these. There's the whole Secret Life. Just the lack of faith, and then thinking of even like on the political world, the disrespect for the last two presidents, even with not even just Trump, even before that, with the church pulling back and the lack of respect for Obama, and now just the media and stuff. It's like they're being kind of programmed to not trust authority. And I see that trickle over even to the church. Like there's like the idea of like, well, the church is out of context. They don't understand what we're going with. Like you said, I talked with the youth pastor yesterday who now this is going back a little bit, but she struggled with some stuff as a teenager and to make a big life decision, and was like, no one knows what I'm going through. No one knows what I'm about ready to do in a couple of days. Like, that's interesting, and that's more of a source than a symptom type thing, right? That's like a much bigger, like it's one thing to go like, this kid has done something that has brought us to our attention, and we need to be there and put attention and work with them through that, versus like, how do we step back for all of our kids, even the kids that we think are safe, right? Like the pastor's kids and the deacon's kids and the kids who've come up from the nursery and kids church and like, oh, they're safe. Like, we don't have to worry about this with them. This eroding of confidence in authority, in going to parents, in going to youth pastors, in going to the senior pastor. That's a really interesting concept and that you brought up. And it's like, so then my brain starts thinking like, okay, well, how do we combat that? And I think part of it, and obviously that's a big thing, I don't have an issue, but part of it, I think, is just this idea of being authentic, but then also being plugged in, like understanding what they're talking about, like being in their world, which takes time, right? You got to put in the time to be involved in their lives and know about what's going on as far as trends go and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I had somebody share with me the other day about an article on the Finstas, and I was like, oh yeah, I've seen these. And they were like, wait, what? Like, I thought this just happened. And I was like, no, I'm actually following a few. Like, I have a few students that trusted me enough to let me follow that, and it tripped me out. I didn't expect. And then the more I see it blowing up, it really trips me out. I think to be part of a couple of those, and I try not to be. It's a really hard line to walk, because some of the stuff I'm like, dude, why are you posting that? Like, and then on the other hand, I'm also like, somehow I've earned enough credibility with them to be included in this side of who they are, which to them is kind of a more raw and real, unfiltered kind of version. But I think the more authenticity that we can show people, like our church did a big thing last fall on like kind of almost like a confession wall. It was a wall of regrets.
Okay.
And we did this in the main service, and it was coupled with this really powerful series talking about how Jesus can wash away our regret and everything. But it didn't come off as condemning or anything. It was more like, we want to give you permission to acknowledge that we've all jacked up our lives at times, and that God can still redeem that. And man, like it was crazy, because we had like a string wall kind of thing built like in the lobby. And so people were writing cards in service and putting them on the wall, and to walk through and look at it was a really weird experience for me. I was brand new at the church, and walking through, I felt like I was invading privacy. They were so real and adults and teens and everybody, like everyone had posted, and we've got a pretty good sized church too. So, like at a big church, a lot of times people go there for a little more anonymity instead of to be known. And so for people to post something this raw, and it's not like they have their name and email address on it or anything, but just writing things, but people put like, I need to stop having this affair, and post it on the wall. And people put like, my porn addiction is killing my marriage, put that on the wall. I can't believe I had an abortion, and put that on the wall. Or all sorts of things. I mean, just crazy. And that, and then just tons more of that kind of stuff. And it's awesome that our people felt safe enough to be that real about what they were going through. But it was, I mean, it felt really voyeuristic. And I guess that's part of our culture right now, but like, that's something that, I mean, I'm old enough to have grown up, to watch the internet kind of like go big, during my lifetime. I remember being a teen and like, whoa, we got a 28.8 modem. It's so fast, AOL. All right. I need a new disc. Yeah. So to now have all of this stuff everywhere, where voyeurism is kind of part of the deal. Everyone's got all these live blogs and videos and stuff all the time, and you kind of just always get a peek into people's lives. But to see it on paper in the church, knowing there's not just some IP address somewhere or some random anonymous account behind this, but it feels so much more real and connected to see it. Like, that's a card that somebody physically wrote with their hand and put it on that wall. Somebody that was in this building or still is in this building just wrote that. That's crazy. And so I think, like, the more that we can do stuff like that, the more that the church can, I think, give permission and share hope. I think it does start to come through. Like, I mean, some of the kids right now, I've only been at my church for 6 months, and some of the relationships I've already started to build. The fact that I preached on this 2 months ago now, it was in March, and one of our, and I had a guy, several people come up after service and around and talking to their leaders and stuff, but people coming to me, parents calling me and talking about, hey, to have a guy sit down and say, hey, I need to talk to you because I'm struggling with the stuff that you were talking about. Like that, we must be doing something right there. And I think it's just the authenticity and the reality to say, like, hey, I'm not going to pretend like being a Jesus follower is going to make this all better. I was a Christian and super depressed. I was following God. I was pursuing my call, and I was really struggling with depression. I've had a lot of friends who are Christians who struggle with depression. We have, pastors and leaders at our church that are on, antidepressant meds and get counseling and do that. And we're open about it, and not in a way that compromises or claims that God's not big enough, but more that, hey, God's big enough to handle this too. And I think that's the shift of authenticity that kind of helps us earn the right to be in those conversations with people, because otherwise, yeah, like you said, they feel like you have nothing to offer me except pray harder and get over it, and that message falls flat.
Yeah, man, I've just really been, the last few months, God's been challenging me kind of to rethink kind of what I'm doing in ministry. And just what keeps coming up is this idea of, like, we have this like platform of, Wednesday, and different people have different days, but like Wednesday service, Sunday service, you've got these couple things, right? And then you're pushing out the message then, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, whatever you come to the service and hear a message, and then expect them to go this whole week. And then they're getting, they're listening to a couple hours of music a day. They're watching all these videos and YouTube and all the different stuff. And so they're having all these little micro pieces of content coming in, pushing the other way, because there's not much of it out there as a positive. So whether they realize it or not, it's all this negative. And then you come in and, okay, sit down. We're going to try to download like 30 minutes of a message to you, and it's supposed to all make sense and all be relevant, and it's supposed to combat the week of that. And it's like, how can I shift the way we do it to where it's not like, we can free up that time. I'm still a big question mark on exactly what do we do with that time. Do we make it more relational? Do we make it, so that part I'm not as clear on, but this idea of, I feel like I've been challenged to put out a lot more content. I come from a background where in 2011, I got out of youth ministry for a few years. I spent a year in sales, and then I spent 3 or 4 years as a freelancer in online marketing, all this kind of stuff. And I really learned all this stuff about, like, getting out there and content marketing and getting and figure out, like, reverse engineer from where they are to where if your product is the solution to their problem, and to get someone there. And I'm thinking, like, so we have all this in the media, right? And we have all this other content, and then I'm a youth pastor, and I have all these skills with video and online stuff, and I'm not using it for ministry. I'm using more of it. And I want to be very careful not to be disrespectful or say, like, oh, an outdated way or anything like that. But, like, how can I adjust and think of myself not as, well, I have my youth group and that's over here, and then I've got my other skills. Like, God's been challenging me to think, like, okay, what if I was a media studio? There's a guy I listen to who talks about how, like, no matter what business you're in, you're a personal brand. Like, first and foremost, you're a content studio, and then whatever you do is you're putting content out about that. If you're selling shoes, if you're selling cars, if you're whatever. And it's like, what if I applied that to, like, my ministry, to where it wasn't like I have my youth ministry over here and then I do some video stuff over here and whatnot. What if it was like, I am this content studio, right? I'm putting out this content, and it's obviously, we know the gospel, the message, and all that. How would that apply? How would that work if I started trying to shift some of the message to the online stuff so they can see it in more relevant ways? What if I shifted a lot of, in a perfect world, every kid would come in, every day, have as much as possible, and we'd sit one and talk with them. That's just not practical. But it is if it's Instagram message, if it's a Snapchat message, if it's a Facebook message. There's kids who, you got those kids who will come a couple weeks and then be gone for a few months, and then, like, they come in and you see them and you're glad to see them, and you shake their hand, you talk to them, you spend some time with them, and I've been having really good success with a few of those kids by posting random stuff and getting into these like vaguely fun arguments, right? Like, this game versus this game, or this sports team and this team, and then, like, this kid who you haven't seen in months, you'll spend 2 days back and forth having this great conversation, and I've even seen it to where then they show up. They haven't been here in months, but you waste this time, quote unquote, from, like, I have this, like, negative, like, if someone's watching, it looks like, well, why did you just spend the last 3 hours debating which Star Wars movie was better, that kind of thing. But then then they message you, and then you show up and you're being present, being in front of them. And, like, how do we take old school methods, preaching the gospel, all these things? I think back to, like, the Puritan idea of that, like, they talk about how their preaching was very repetitive, in the fact that they thought of it as a screw. Like, you don't just hammer it in and it's done. You keep coming back around it. Now, I can't speak every single week. I can't do a 13-week series if I want to, and they're not going to be there every single week. But, like, I can take that same amount of content. I can put it out in all these
messages.
Exactly. Yeah.
13 videos.
Exactly. But I can put it out in all these different things. And if it's a 3-minute video here and a 26-minute vlog here and a snap here and a post here, I can be much more thorough with it. And then just this idea too of, like, getting back to the old school. There's a book, I think it's called Reformed Pastor, and it's all about they call it catechism, but, like, for the pastors back in the day, like, he would preach his message on Sunday, and then the rest of his week was going from house to house to house, having family catechism. Basically, like, the idea of, like, okay, did you meeting with the family? Did you understand the message? How can this apply? And working with them one-on-one, even meeting with the kids separately. Like, what did we talk about? Like, making sure people understood. And I was like, man, we could bring that back, but with the aid of digital stuff, it doesn't mean that you have to spend all week, like, literally going from house to house. It means you can pick up your cell phone, and for this is where it comes in for me. Like, okay, cut out some leisure time, cut out some, instead of watching 3 hours of Netflix at night, spend some of that time, carve out some of that time and interacting with students, or even while you're doing it. Like, instead of, like, the thing is, like, you're not only are you watching or whatever, but you're also on your phone. That's, like, the thing. Like, stop just scrolling through Facebook and just what's going on, being intentional, messaging students, interacting with them. So that's what I've been personally being challenged on, is this idea of rethinking the way I do it and being much more involved. And so, yeah, that's just kind of where I am, and I'm just in the beginning of starting to walk into that and see kind of what that looks like. And it's kind of scary, because then it's like, there's a lot, right? Like, the self-doubt, there's, like, what if someone thinks that this is weird? What if you know, a leader of the church is like, what are you doing? What are you spending so much of your time? And so there's a lot of negative, but this is where I feel like I'm being pushed out. And then this is like the first kind of, since I've started this like big topic, that I felt like God's like attacked this topic. So yeah, that's kind of where I am. And some of the stuff you've said is, I mean, I've got these notes down with just some areas to look into and really pray about, and just some of these like bigger problems. So I don't know, what are your kind of thoughts, and how have you kind of seen stuff like that play out?
Totally. No, yeah, I'm working through the same kind of thing. It's weird too. Like, you know, it used to be there was a generational difference between like, okay, the adults and the kids are going to use different things, and then it was like, okay, well, high school and middle school are going to use different forms of communication. Now I feel like it's every grade level has kind of its own thing. Like I've got juniors and seniors that are on Twitter, but the sophomores are like, what's Twitter? Like I don't even, like I have one, but I don't even use it.
Yeah.
And then, but then I have like, you know, some like, well, and I guess it spreads more across, but like I've got some students that are on Twitter and that's their thing. I've got some students that are on Instagram. And so like, if they're going to communicate with me, they have my phone number, they have my email address, they know where my office is, that, you know, they can call, they can text, they can whatever. They'll send me a snap. And then I have different kids that they will only Instagram direct message me. And then I've got other kids that will only Twitter message me.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like I've got to have every social media platform just to have communication with 10 students. Yeah.
And then
it's
the
so
thing
weird.
is,
It's like, okay, but I've got 100 of you guys, so I'm not supposed to do that, you know? Like,
yeah.
I don't think there's 100 different platforms, but there might be. I might be missing that, but no, I have the same thoughts of like, I'm still wrestling with the idea. I think part of it's just, you know, the old guy feeling like, I don't know how relevant I'm going to be at times, but like I'm, you know, as I'm watching 13 Reasons, I think, you know, maybe I should be like snapping commentary through this, you know, and just post that, or Instagram, you know, maybe I should just be Instagram story commenting my way through the show, and then save those. Or maybe I should, you know, do a YouTube review of each episode and talk through it and put it on our ministry channel. I don't know. We've had some pretty decent response to, we have question boxes in our youth room, and we've responded to those via YouTube videos. We've only done a few of them so far. Trying to get into the rhythm of it is hard because it's a different mentality. It's like, okay, I've got to figure out how to put more and more. Like if I'm meant to be doing ministry all the time, I can't just be caught up in busy work and like, all right, well, I got to administrate this thing and do that. Like, no, I have, you know, like there's somebody else to do that.
Yeah.
How do I spend more of my time, you know, ministering with students? Used to be, hey, let's show up and have lunch. Now it's, you know, post something on YouTube and 100 of those students are going to interact with it. Yeah, and it's weird. And so, yeah, I'm in that same place of questioning, but I don't have the right answer yet. And I don't know that there is a right answer. I think it's like as much as we can keep up with / get ahead of where the trends are going, and just know that like whatever works right now probably won't work in 6 months.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
You know, and so like it can't go too all in on that. You know, right now, I think the biggest of all the things, the biggest social media win that we have going for us is Facebook Live videos of our messages. That's like the number one, like consistently good response kind of thing we do. Other than that, everything else is super hit or miss for us. Like our Instagram channel, some things get, you know, 100 likes and, you know, a ton of views, and some things get 0.
Yeah.
And I can't figure out, I'm looking at it, I'm going like, okay, statistically, this is when everybody's on. This is when Instagram is telling me all of my followers are on. This is when they're most active. So I post like right at the beginning of that window and I'll get like nothing. And then I'll post it like a random time. Like I'll be like, oh, I got to put this out there. And I'll put it out at like 10:30 at night. It'll get 400 likes, you know, not really, but you know, and I'm like, why did that one go crazy? And this other one, like, it wasn't even good. Like, and you know, the quality doesn't seem to always be the difference maker. You know, I try to, like, if I do a video, like pick the right thumbnail, may or may not work. It's just super weird to identify, like, and yeah, I don't know. But then when I browse the internet too, like, I can't even keep track of what keeps my own attention. Facebook hasn't figured out apparently, but like, you know, it's weird, the stuff I'll find myself clickbaiting through on the internet, and then the stuff that I just like scroll past, and I'm like, that was probably actually a better thing for me to watch, but I didn't.
I do that all the time. Yeah, and to me, like, I'm trying to think, and like, so I grew up a youth pastor kid. Like, so I grew up not in youth, but as a kid watching my dad be a '90s youth pastor. You know, at the time it was all event stuff. That's what you did. Like, you could throw what would by our standards now be a lame event, and it would be an amazing event. And you could have a ton of students show up, and they'd bring friends, and that was what you did. You carved out as much of a budget as you could for events. And weekly, if you could have a weekly event service, like I remember my dad we had the regular youth, like Wednesdays, I think, you know, very traditional, and we had like the Sunday school and all that kind of stuff. But then he started doing these like Friday Night Lights type services where it was literally a Friday service. It was these games. It was hugely successful. And I think to me, it's wrapping around and then talking about like how you spend, you know, your time in all these different ones and where they go. I think what I've been challenged is to stop thinking about it like a pastor and start thinking about it as like a missionary, because I'm thinking like, how do I justify that I'm going to spend 3 hours of my day creating this different content? Because you can't just push one thing out, obviously, in all of them. You have to know, like, okay, how am I going to, where do I put this? You have to know it. You have to basically be an expert at it to do it effectively. You have to have the time to sit there on your phone and message back to students. You put something out there and you get 3 of them, and all of a sudden you have 3 conversations. There can go an hour and a half of your time because you're having 3 conversations with 3 different students back and forth, and you're looking stuff up, and you know, you're all that kind of stuff.
But with that, like with those conversations, like as much as it seems like, oh, that's a waste of time because it's all digital stuff. At the same time, if I had 3 students walk in, or, you know, if my day was full of students coming in for meetings to talk with me about stuff, and it wasn't just like, hey man, I just wanted to talk Nerf gun, you know, technology. But it was something decent, you know, like my boss, my team, my staff, the staff of the church, like they'd be stoked to see students coming in all day, just sitting down to chat with me and talk through life. I would walk away from that day feeling like, oh, that was way more productive than that stupid spreadsheet I was trying to work through, you know, like, and so I think part of that too, the paradigm shift of like, no, I gotta get out of this the
normal,
the standard, you know, if we're going to reach this digital age, we've got to be super engaged there. And like you said, missionary work, I mean, you know, my friends that are missionaries, they're not sitting around in an office doing a bunch of spreadsheets. Like, you know, they're hanging out, you know, rebuilding a village hut that burned down or something, you know, or they're out in the community getting to know people. They're doing things that are making a difference in building relationship in the community, and prioritizing relationship and knowing that that's going to earn us the right to get there. And I think that's where, I think in the 90s, there was maybe a mentality too much in this direction of like, all we do is fun. And then when we hit that place of like where life is hard, they're going to come back to us, and they may or may not, because they also hear there was a reputation that youth ministry had for being super shallow in that time as well. And not to say that there weren't great youth pastors in the 90s, but the reputation was it's all fun, and the God part of it was like, oh, just believe the Bible because God wrote it, you deal with it, you know, and just pray and it'll be fine. And then people came and were like, hey, well, you know, it turns out the rest of the world actually has like critical thought and, you know, challenging ideas about stuff, and we don't have any answers. So, you know, jettison Christianity. But so now, like, I think building that relationship, you know, is super important. Like that authentic, holistic relationship, showing students how this ties into every aspect of our lives. That's, I mean, like, you know, when we do small groups, and especially in high school, but also with middle school, like I constantly remind my leaders, I don't care if you use our curriculum. I'll spend money on it just to have you walk in with something so it looks like you had something to come in to talk about. But if you walk into your youth group and you ditch the whole thing to just get to know your students, if you know them and they know that you care about them, not that they think you're the coolest person, not that they think that you're just like them. And, you know, like if you're 50, you shouldn't be just like a 12-year-old. That's weird, you know, but if a 12-year-old can look at this 50-year-old and go, man, you really care about me. This whole Jesus thing and loving people the way he loved us really means something to you. Then when I feel broken and hurt and everything else, then, and I know I have this 50-year-old that I can go to and ask for help, that genuinely cares and doesn't judge, but brings grace and offers truth in a way that calls me into deeper relationship and calls me back toward health. And I can see the dedication to our, you know, relationship and fellowship pouring into that. And I think, you know, so from that side of it, like, yeah, I want to go hang out. You know, I'm still in the process of identifying like where do kids go eat lunch. You know, like the kids who can leave campus, where do they go? What's the busiest restaurant in the community at lunchtime? Cool. I'm gonna go post up there and just post on Instagram and Snapchat like, hey, first 10 people who show up can get a burrito on me, you know, or something. You know, like what can I do just to, and stuff like that has brought new people. You know, I did that. I had one kid respond. One. I told a ton of people, they were like, oh, that sounds cool. And then none of them showed up. This one guy is super fringe anyway. And he showed up and he brought 4 friends because he needed a ride. And so he got in the car with a bunch of friends and was like, hey, we're going to Taco Bell. And they're like, why? He's like, just do it. And they showed up and I'm like, hey guys, cool. Burritos on me. And I bought $1 burritos for everybody. And we sat down and they're like halfway through the burritos. And one kid looks over, he's like, so who are you and why did you buy me a burrito? I'm like, he didn't even tell you? Oh man, this is awesome. Like, and I was like, well, and he goes, this is my youth pastor, dude. He's awesome. And then I like didn't even say anything else. Like I just sat there and like let them talk and just hung out. And they were all like, this was cool, man. Like, so where's your church? Like, when do you meet? And one of the guys showed up. So right there, when, you know, like I'll do that. Just, I mean, they got the idea that like, hey, maybe here's somebody who cares. And it doesn't always work out that cool. I'm not that awesome, but it sometimes it works really, really well. And I think that is what the students, what teenagers are looking for is a bit of authenticity in the midst of all this digital stuff that they feel all this pressure to do. They feel compelled to be part of that world. And at the same time, they're fully aware of how fake it is because they know how fake their persona online is. And even with their Finstas or whatever, like they know they're putting out a false perception. They're tweaking what gets seen. They're selecting and editing. It's not a constant 24/7 video. It's, you know, it's picking and choosing what's going to go there. And so they know that this isn't the whole picture. This is never the whole story. It's never the truly authentic thing. The only real version of that is the people who are around all the time. And so if that can be us, I think it means a ton. So.
Yeah, that's good. I think part two is back to like that kind of missionary comment I made is, you know, missionaries don't have a problem doing things that seem to be like ministry, not ministry related, like, you know, just learning the language, like figuring like out how to like growing the crops for whatever. There's all these things that like in church, like we don't consider, you know, being a youth pastor, like I don't deal with that here, but like in the past issues of like, well, the youth pastor is not in his office enough, or oh, he's in his office too much. He's not out with the students, depending on what they consider like, you know, youth pastor work. Versus if you sat in your office or you sat at home or wherever it was, and you made that comment about all those kids. Like if you had a full day, like an 8-hour day of kids coming in talking, they'd be like, oh wow, the youth pastor's doing great. Versus if you're sitting in your office the entire day on your phone, they'd be like, is he playing games all day? Is he watching Netflix? Like, we need to fire this guy.
Yeah, totally. Angry Birds all day.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody plays that.
But that concept of being able to shift and where it is, and it's funny because it kind of got me back. You know, I mentioned my dad and stuff. Like he used the game stuff as like a feeder, and then he did. Now he didn't have the digital, right? So instead of kids message him, like they did it in real time, like real life. So like they would have every church service, like you're out to eat with someone. They had a lot of older college kids, so they over at our house all the time. You know, bringing food, my parents cooking them food. They had small groups where kids would come. they would eat, they'd hang out there. Most of them were college kids. So like, my mom was a great cook. So like she'd make a couple, pans of enchiladas and some good food, and people all come over to hang out. And, they'd have an hour of eating and hanging out, and then a topic would get brought up, and these kids would feel like they would tell my parents stuff that they would never tell, anyone else, and get to talk to them.
Yeah.
And I feel like if we're willing to make that shift, like, some of it's going to be digitally, some of it's going to be those messages, but like we can still, it's an opportunity. We were wondering like, oh, the numbers are going down. Like we're not having as many kids coming. They're not coming out as much. They're distracted. Their attention's everywhere. But there's an example with a lot of, or an opportunity with a lot of this stuff to where, if we're willing to put in the time, like and learn the platforms, learn the stuff, like there are a lot of opportunities there where we do the big fun things. We do stuff like, hey, show up, like for those 4 kids, like you met them, you bought them tacos or burritos, and then in the old paradigm, there's a good chance you may never see the other ones again because they came for the one time, and then you may see them once or twice a year or not at all. Versus now, like you could find them on social, you could follow them, you could interact with them, you can comment on their stuff, they can see something you did and interact with it. So I think it's a great opportunity, but it's having that mental shift of like allowing yourself, okay, it's okay to spend the extra time doing things that are perceived as maybe not real work, and then figuring out, okay, how do I shift my schedule to be able to spend the time? I mean, like you said, like you'd have no problem, oh, there's a kid here to talk to me, I'm going to drop what I'm doing, versus like, oh, a kid just messaged me, well, I'm busy right now, like I can't just be on Instagram for the next 45 minutes and talking to, what I mean, like trying to figure out like what that looks like and whatnot, and take advantage of those opportunities. It's just, I don't know, it's interesting to me, that whole thing.
Yeah, for sure. So. I think trying to, not trying to compete with everything. I don't know. This is like the new version of like the sports complaint about people not showing up, to youth, and that's still a big issue. But I think the people who are really successful are the ones who either give up on reaching jocks, or you find a way to be part of the team or part of that community, and reach out to them, meet with the kid on a different night and teach them how to be a missionary on their team, or whatever else. And then suddenly it's like, oh wow, I took this kid who stopped coming but wanted a deeper relationship with Jesus, took the time to mentor them, and now they're the chaplain of their team instead of just being like the kid who dropped out of my youth group. And so like how can we do that kind of stuff? Like you said, like learning the culture and the language of all this stuff, like absolutely. But I got a friend who he's a missionary in Enga, or in the language is Enga. He's in Papua New Guinea. All these different languages. He had to study the biblical languages. He had to study like how language works, how to create a written language from a non-written language, how to do all of this stuff. And then he went over to Papua New Guinea. He's learning their language and everything else. And they've got a common language that a lot of the people speak, but he's trying to put Bible into tribal languages there. And, he could do it all himself and try to learn everything and try and do everything else. Or what's more successful, which like when I hear it on the surface, I'm like, wait, you left the United States to go be a Bible translator in a foreign country. That sounds super boring and uncomfortable. Like that, it sounds like hot and miserable and probably dangerous, but also extremely boring. But because I wouldn't want to do that. But a lot of what he's actually doing is like training up pastors. He's going to villages and evangelizing and raising up Christian and making disciples. And as he finds a disciple who steps up, he raises them up. He's helping build up pastors. As they raise up pastors and they learn the scripture more and more, they're the ones helping him translate because they know the language. And as they really learn the theology and the relationship with God and what it means to walk this out, they're able to give a super accurate description that like he could be there 20 years and not get to the point of knowing this language the way they know it. And so it's always going to be a third or fourth language to him, not a first.
Yeah.
And so these people who this is their first language, they know it in a heart place that he can't get to. And so they're the ones who are crucial in making this happen. So for us, I can learn a lot about Snapchat, but you know, at the same time, it came out when I was in my 20s or 30s. I don't know. It's not that old, so
Yeah.
Probably 30s. I'm old guy. So the faster the stuff comes out, the more old I feel. But then, so who's the 16-year-old that loves Jesus and is willing to be our translator for Snapchat? You know, who's that 12-year-old that is on Instagram every freaking day that I can go, okay, let me leverage this for, you know, how can I pour into that student so that they can be an ambassador for Jesus in the midst of that platform? How can I help them be, you know, can I give them the keys to our Instagram account and have them go off and just, you know, like I'll send them things and they'll post like crazy and they'll talk about it and they'll, you know, like, how can we do that? And not to mention like the biblical plan for the biblical job description is not for me to do everything. Ephesians 4 tells me my biblical job description is to raise up disciples who go and do all this work. It's to empower the church to do this. And the church for us as youth pastors, I mean, as much as we don't want to silo out, we run tiny congregations of short people, you know? And so how do we empower our church, these legions of students that show up, or the 10 that show up, to be missionaries in their field? Because if we're not doing that, then are we living the Great Commission? If I'm just teaching kids to be Christians when they get to college and through college, is that really making disciples and teaching them to, you know, and baptizing them and teaching them to obey everything Jesus commanded? Or am I just making little church attendees so that they'll tithe and attend a church somewhere? You know,
on the
really making disciples, you know?
Yeah. And on the best case scenario, even if the answer is yes, you're doing it by addition instead of multiplication.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So how do I, but yeah, like Jesus, like, man, the parable of the sower is so convicting as a youth pastor. I mean, not just in like, oh, okay, we got to do better evangelism and explain this, but no. Look at the jump goes from somebody who it doesn't even sink in and Satan takes it away, somebody who gets ripped down immediately as soon as something difficult happens in their faith and they didn't plant any roots, somebody who gets torn down by the thorns and distractions and pain of this world and struggles of this life. The next step forward is not somebody who was a decent Christian and like took their kids to church and attended most weeks. The next step is it grew up a crop that multiplied 30, 60, 100 times. Yeah. Like there's no difference there. It's either like getting choked out by the world or becoming a multiplier.
Yeah, 30 is that next level.
Yeah, 30. So like that next level. So that seed I'm planting in that student, the goal is not that they keep attending church. The goal is that they at minimum produce 30 times what I gave them. So how am I pouring into them in a way that's opening that up to where they're not just like not posting nude pics on Instagram, you know, but how do I get to where they're moving way beyond that to become a missionary and be a light bringer in the midst of their location? And that is an immensely more difficult task, but it's also, you know, so I don't know, in the midst of all of this craziness in the culture, how do I start recognizing that fertile soil and putting it out there? And how do we, with all the stuff you're talking about, like, I don't think it means any less of us doing it, but just more with the mentality of like, man, how do I bring in other people? So like the videos I was talking about with our questions, it's step one toward that. I'm bringing in students to be part of the Hangouts like this, to have these conversations and going, okay, it'll be me and 2 or 3 students, and you know, 2 of those students may not even have good answers. They may not know scripture. I did one on prayer, and like, you know, one of our students misquoted a couple things and said some stuff that I was like, yeah, that worked. But like, really, even just that of like, let me hear, you know, like, okay, so why do you pray? Well, this is why she prays. Like, and I can get all nitpicky about the theology of what she said, or I can go, here's a kid who really thinks that prayer is important in her life. So how can I continue to encourage that so that she continues developing a relationship with Jesus and trust that the everlasting God, who is the Alpha and Omega, that she's actually speaking to in the spirit, might actually, you know, lead her into a deeper relationship with him if I encourage her to keep that conversation going, rather than going, oh yeah, you didn't do it right, you need to fix that, you know. And so like how can I encourage and build that up and trust that, you know, God's going to get a hold of me. I don't know, it's hard, but I think that's kind of the path.
Yeah, and it makes me think of, I was recently at a pastor's event in DC where they had a bunch of congressmen, Christian congressmen and women and stuff come together, and they're talking about, you know, all this other stuff. But the thing that particularly makes me think about is there, David Barton was giving a presentation. He talked about how, like, he went back to like a lot of the great like founding fathers, and he listed off these names, like these guys, like the ones that helped really found the country. They were, and he gave all these examples of like how godly they were and all the things they did. And he said, but how did they know? Like, how did they know the scripture? If they're politicians, how did they, and he, like, to answer that question, like, why were they so godly? And he said, if you back up to when they were kids, he said, you go back to it's the Great Awakening, and he listed a handful of names of like the great, you know, Finney and all these like Great Awakening pastors, right? And he said back then the tradition is when they traveled around city to city doing their ministry, they took a couple of kids with them, like they understudies basically, to help them to do ministry with them, right? And so he starts listing like each of these Great Awakening preachers, and then which corresponding like founding father and like that was there, and then didn't go into ministry, traditional ministry, but became a politician and shaped our godly heritage and shaped like the country. And it was like, wow, because that's something I've kind of, that's kind of one of my core strengths is having a small group of guys. I started off as the media minister before youth pastor, and I had at the time, it was funny, I had 13 guys, 2 girls, but mostly guys in my media team, and the youth group had 14. So like I had one less in my media team, teenager, than the youth group had in youth ministry. And I had a handful of them that, you know, I would do that, like, you know, like I'd see something in someone's life and I'd say, hey, text your mom, let her know, I'll give you a ride home. And they knew what that meant. That meant, uh-oh, he's going to talk to me on the way home. And it dawned on me like, okay, so that was something that when I first started, before I knew how to do youth ministry, because I wasn't a youth pastor, I had success with. And I was like, that's obviously powerful. How do I double down on that? And how do I like really bring that out? Because it's like, it's not so much like, what am I going to do with my life? But it's like, what are the people I influence with my life going to do in their lives? Yeah. And it's so much more of an effect. And so like what you're just saying is huge. I think such a key.
Yeah.
Super encouraging.
My last church and my current church is, we're talking about this a lot right now too. But my last church, we spent a few years just building and building and building on really shaping our ministry model around 2 Timothy 2:2. Okay. And which is Paul telling Timothy, you know, take the things that this is the terrible Brian paraphrase, but you know, it's you know, take the things that I have given to you, and teach them to reliable men who will also teach them to others. And so essentially, like establishing like a 4-part cascading leadership development pipeline or waterfall, you know. And so like, so the question was always, and so, I mean, even I was talking with my student team about this just the other day, but like always having a Paul, like everybody needs to be Timothy in that process. Like Paul says, take the things I've given to you. So always finding somebody above us that's pouring in, and then find somebody reliable to teach it to. And so like as number 2 in the spot, like number 1 is Paul, number 2 is Timothy, number 3 is those reliable people who will pour it on to number 4 others. And so there's always the expectation that as you're getting poured into, so like if it's, you know, not that it worked this way, but if it was Paul, Timothy, and then Luke or Silas, or, you know, somebody just to put a name there, Joe Bob, you know, and it's like, you know, Paul pours into Timothy, who pours into Joe Bob, who's going to find other people to pour into. But then Timothy is Joe Bob's Paul, you know? And so like Joe Bob's got to have people he's pouring into who are going to be reliable to keep passing it on. and to always have this cascade of leadership pouring down, this cascade of discipleship pouring down, that we never get to that place where, again, I mean, it goes right back to, that's the principle behind what I was talking about with, like, you know, the parable of the sower. Am I planting seeds with the expectation that they multiply, or am I just hoping that it grows through the thorns?
Yeah.
And lasts for a while. And so the idea of pouring into everybody all the time. And so, like, you know, I put my name in there, like, okay, one of our, you know, our executive pastor speaks into my life and my ministry and my leadership a lot. And then I have an intern who's a pastoral resident intern who's going to be a youth pastor again when he graduates out of our program next year. And so, like, you know, so I'm pouring into him, but who's he pouring into? And then so if, for his perspective, I'm pouring into him so that he can pour into others, and they need to know that they're supposed to pour out. Every leader that I meet with needs to have that, everything. And so, like, always having a multiplication effect, you know, it's the multi-level marketing kind of, you know, pyramid scheme for church, you know.
Yeah.
Only it's actually something that will change your life. It's not just Mary Kay or essential oils or whatever other, you know, ridiculous, you know, body wrap. Yeah, I don't know. Like, there's all those things out there, like, this is going to change your life. You want something that's going to change your life? Like, yeah, I do. I don't want to have to hire 15 people to do it, but, like, the kingdom actually does work this way. The more people that we pour into with this understanding, the more the kingdom is built, and the more that they actually begin to live out what their true calling is. And again, like, man, there's nothing close to the average American Christian. There's no description of their Christianity or lifestyle that comes from the Bible. Like, there's no biblical evidence for that style of sitting in church and then going home and, like, maybe thinking about it once or twice. It was like, you know, you're a disciple or you're not. And if you're a disciple, you're following, you're making other disciples. There's no other option. There's either strangled out by thorns or there's, you know, a corn crop.
Yeah.
So
it's awesome. Well, this has been good. This is you know, a lot to think about, but it's been good. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, man. Thanks.
Yeah,
it's been fun.
Yeah, I'll definitely keep in touch. I obviously follow me on Facebook, so I'll reach out and keep the conversation going. But it was just, again, I just want to thank you for the little over an hour that you've given me to just kind of discuss. And
oh man, has it been that long?
Yeah.
We're cutting into my nap time here, bro. Just kidding. Sort of. It's all good. Well, no, it's been awesome, man. Thanks for hitting me up and chatting with me. It's been good. It's given me a lot to think about.
That's good. Cool. Yeah, so I'm sure I'll be reaching back out to you with just some clarifications, or, hey, I mean, I thought of this based on our talk. What do you think, or whatever. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, hey, let me know where this goes too. I'd love to keep up with this, because this is stuff that, you know, I'll probably grab a piece of this somehow and show it to my leaders and show it to my team. And,
cool. Yeah.
You know, this is important stuff. We got to figure this out and do it great for Jesus. You know, it's his name on the line here. It's you know, it's our job to make him famous. So how can we do that? I want to figure it out. Let me know what we can come up with.
All right, will do. Thank you so much again. So awesome. You have a great rest of the day.
You too, man.